was 18, my mom was giving me a ride to work. My car had got impounded for something stupid, and I had to wait 30 days to get it back. In the meantime, my mom was giving me rides to work. On Saturdays, I worked morning shifts, so I had to be at work by 5 a.m. That means we had to leave the house no later than 4:30. It was still dark outside, like pitch black and very cold. That morning, as my mom drove me to work, from a distance I could see a figure getting ready to cross the road, basically jaywalk in front of us. As we got closer, I can see it was a young girl. I thought to myself, damn, caught her doing the walk of shame. She had no shoes, a long white shirt, like it was a man's white t-shirt. It was big on her. It looked like she had no pants on, but you could barely see she had these short jean shorts under her large shirt, like the kind that used to be pants, but she cut them herself to make shorts. She was not wearing shoes. My mom started talking shit in Spanish, like what kind of girl walks around the streets at this hour dressed like that. She was walking now in the middle of the street, super slow, to the point where my mom had to stop like 10 feet away from her because she was still in the street and she was now blocking us. When my mom stopped, the girl came to a complete stop, but she wasn't facing us. She was facing in the direction she was crossing. As we now were close, I could see her skin was a real bluish gray. Her hair was black. It looked wet and tangled, like she just got out of the shower. My mom was about to honk at her when she slowly turned her head to look right at us. Her hair was covering her face. She looked like the girl from The Ring. Dun, dun, dun. The part that I'll never forget was that she moved her hair out of the way and she had no face. Like nothing. It was just all smooth, like Slender Man. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. It just looked smooth. My mom started to have a panic attack. I literally felt my heart drop. I was now focused on calming my mom down. The girl looked at us for like 2 to 3 seconds, then she took off running. She didn't move at an irregular speed, but she was now active. I never saw anything like that in my life. To this day, my mom and I can't explain what that was. I guess I was sharing my story in hopes that maybe someone else has seen something similar, something with no face. And that is the end of that amazing story. Amazing story. You can picture it vividly, and I love that. Very nice work, very nice work. And if it really happened, that's concerning. That's very concerning. Very scary. Okay, this next story is called Very Strange Activity with the Neighbors. Hey, good evening. I'm on night shift tonight, so I figured I'd finally type this out. It's been ongoing for a few weeks, but seems to be over. I hope, at least. So, I'm between places to live right now. My old apartment got condemned, so I, a 24-year-old female, am splitting time between my brother's house and my boyfriend's house while I'm finding an apartment. Unfortunately, we're in a hardcore housing crisis down here right now, so it's taking longer than I'd like. So my boyfriend has only been living here for a couple of months. He shares a yard with his neighbors, which is rented out by the same landlord. The neighbors gave me no bad impressions at first. It's a husband, a wife, a daughter, and somebody whose relation to the family was never made clear to me. He's a guy though, mid-40s. So the first thing that kind of got me thinking was the fact that their bedroom activities could be heard loudly. was when the wife had come outside as I was leaving for work. She was wearing nothing but sweatpants. To make it clear, I saw some titties. I had to recover from that one. She just carried on doing what she was doing. The next thing, which seemed to be the final straw for my boyfriend, was when he and I were trying to sleep. They randomly started stomping on the floor inside of their house and started chanting. Not sure what they were saying, if anything at all, but he was getting restless. The next day, he went over to the husband and told them that they needed to keep it down. Both he and his wife were confused and played dumb. My boyfriend jumped to the conclusion that they were on drugs, and I won't lie, so did I, but they argued profusely that they didn't do that. Their verbal altercation lasted a few minutes before my boyfriend simply told them to stay on their side of the yard and to stay quiet. This lasted for a whole day before the wife had come outside wearing nothing but a sports bra and sleep shorts and fell asleep by the fire pit. I'm a nurse by trade, so I went to see if she was okay and found that she wasn't breathing. I called 911. An ambulance came and got her, along with the two of the others, who were also unconscious inside of the house. I had remembered after all of this was settled that my boyfriend had said once upon meeting them that the wife had mentioned that all of their windows were unopenable. They had suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning. None of them passed during the ordeal, thankfully. All three survived, but I haven't seen them since, and I doubt that they'll be back in the house. I guess what I'm trying to say is, be safe, and make sure that your house is up to code before moving in. We are currently in the process of having his house checked, just to be on the safe side. Wow, that's pretty crazy. That's like something you never really think about. Dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. It is a real thing, and yeah, I should get that checked. I decided to go down. Okay, this third story is called Hanging Rock. This all happened within about a 24-hour period. Here in Australia, we get a couple days off as holidays for Easter weekend, and people usually go away for the long weekend. So lucky I didn't get Easter off. Oh wait, it's Sunday. I didn't get an extra day off. Okay. Anyway, my wife and two kids went for a short day bushwalk/hike at a place called Hanging Rock in Victoria, Australia. It's about 1 hour northwest of Melbourne. You can see what it looks like and get the trail info here from this generic hiking map, which I'll post right now. Or here is a generic PDF map from the local rangers. It's a fairly short walk, only takes about an hour, but we allowed for a couple hours because we wanted to walk around the bottom. And of course, with the kids, we usually like to stop for snacks and drinks on the way up and just enjoy the place. We had not done this walk before because we are not from the area, but we are somewhat of a walking/hiking family. My wife's family are German, and it's basically in their blood, and is a favorite thing for them all to do. I fall into that very well, as I have always been an avid walker and hiker too. Because the weather was mild, and it was the last day of the long Easter weekend, there were surprisingly not so many people. A couple walked past us on the way down, and we saw another group heading up ahead of us. It looked like a family group, but their kids were older. There were also some people having a barbecue picnic, and some others kicking a ball around down the bottom. Before we go up, I quickly went behind a tree and did a piss, making sure not to be seen. We headed up, and I personally started to feel strange. both seemed fine, laughing. My boy was throwing sticks and rocks, and generally they were just being kids. The uneasiness did not stop. I honestly started feeling really out of breath, and as if I was being suffocated and could not breathe. I started to freak out a little, if I'm being honest, at this stage, and began wondering if I was having some sort of a heart attack or something. So I told my kids to hold up. I squatted down on the ground and leaned against a boulder. That is scary. My wife started to look really concerned, and she grabbed my daughter's fitness tracker watch and put it on my wrist. My heart rate was high, about 131 beats per minute, but that was normal as we were going up these steps. Here is where things started to get creepy. As we waited around for a bit for me to feel better, my son was now climbing all over the boulders and jumping off of them. My daughter put her watch back on, but it stopped reading properly, and she noticed this straight away. It's a brand new kid's Fitbit that she got for her birthday in February. The time was right, but it was not reading her steps or heart rate. Okay, that's weird, because it just read my heart rate fine, but was not taking hers, and the step counter wasn't working either. Whatever, she tinkered with it for a moment while standing, and then bizarrely I started to feel better, and so we all started off again. We continued up, and as we headed up, we got to a rocky clearing where you could look outward. You could see some farmland, and generally it was beautiful. My wife was the only one that brought her phone. I left mine in the car, and she wanted to take a picture of us all. Here's where it gets creepier. Her phone was off. She never turns her phone off ever, and it too is fairly new. It's a Sony Xperia, and is about a year or two old. Her charge lasts days if she's not watching YouTube. She tried to turn it back on, and the low battery image appeared. How is it low battery when she keeps her phone charging at night while she sleeps? And we left for our trip first thing in the morning, and my wife never uses her phone in the car because she becomes motion sick otherwise. But I also used my phone to navigate us there. Weird. The kids go ahead. My son is running around like a lunatic, and my daughter is just walking and taking it all in. And I ask my wife if she thinks it's weird her phone is playing up, and so is our daughter's Fitbit. She shrugs it off and does not even say anything. We slowly get to the top, and as we get there, my son, who is 6 and full of energy, is jumping around, throwing things, and doing cartwheels the whole time. He starts telling us his tummy feels funny. He's now gone pale and looks like he's about to vomit. We asked if he needed a number 1 or 2. No, nothing. He just feels sick, he says. My wife, daughter, and I all look at each other, and I think we were all thinking the same thing, but no one said anything. We all just started walking back out and wanted to get out of there. Too many weird and creepy things were now happening that didn't make sense, and now my son felt sick when he was bouncing off the walls 30 seconds ago. We start walking back. My son is now deflated. My daughter is asking questions. My wife isn't saying anything. We all just hurry down. Once we get back down, we walk past the oval and go straight to the toilets. I take my son in. He tries to pee, and he doesn't need to do number 2, but also does not feel much better, and we're just kind of sitting there thinking about what to do next. Do we leave? He feels sick. What if he throws up? Do we just chill there, go for another short walk, and hope he feels better? Then my daughter just wanders off to this information board while my wife and I were talking about what to do, so we all kind of just follow her. There is a sign about the sacred aboriginal volcanic rock formations, which I had not paid any attention to earlier. The signs, that is, and I start getting an unsettling feeling similar to the one I had on the way up. That choky, out of breath feeling. My son was chucking rocks at those things. The sacred rocks. He was running up and kicking himself off of them. Pretty sure my wife even told him off for spitting once or twice. I became aware of it all, and I realized we were on some kind of sacred land, and here is my son acting completely disrespectful. I had taken a piss there, and who knows what other dumb crap we had so do I. He doesn't really understand what I'm saying, so I just say, come with me, as I go to head back toward the path for the way back to the start of the summit, and he starts screaming and shouting. I've never seen him do anything like this. Outside of being energetic, he is not all that sulky or a crybaby of a child. My wife comes over and asks what's going on. My daughter is still by the information board, just milling about looking at things. I tell my wife my crazy idea. She gives me that look as if I'm insane, picks our boy up, and begins to walk away. So I walk back on my own. I find some similar looking volcanic rock before the summit even starts, and I just go quiet and whisper, I'm sorry if we acted rude or misbehaved. This is a beautiful place. We'll be respectful. I'm sorry if my son was disrespectful. Thank you for having us. And I kneel down, touch the ground and the rock, and just sit for a moment in silence. I start walking back, and I notice they're all heading back towards where I am. My son is now walking again. He's come over to me looking like he has some more color in his face, and I ask him if he wants to say something to the rock like I just did, and that it's fine. And he says, hi Rocky Rock Rock, or something like that. And I say, no mate, we need to be respectful. And I tell him to say sorry, say thanks, and say something nice in his own words. And he says, sorry Rock for throwing your rock friends around. See you next time, Rocky Rock Rock. My wife kind of laughs and shakes her head. My daughter starts explaining to her brother what we just did, why it's important, and we kind of stand around in silence for a second. And then I'll go back and pile in the car and start to head out to go find somewhere for lunch. We get home later that evening after having a long lunch and walking around a nearby town called Woodend, and the kids are playing at the playground. Both my son and daughter have had night terrors since they were about 3 years old. My daughter has mostly grown out of them, and my son still gets them. And I'm talking, they are not nice at all. We used to think my daughter was freaking possessed when she would get them. She'd get aggressive, hiss and spit and cry and screech. They were horrible. My son, he basically just freaks out and starts screaming and looking absolutely terrified and wanting to jump off his bed usually. Well, here's the strangest thing. We are all asleep that same night after having been on the walk that day. I sort of just jolt awake in the dark because I sense something or I hear something. I don't know why I woke up. I kind of put my head up from my pillow and look around, and I see a dark silhouette standing next to my wife. I freaking absolutely shit bricks. I scream like a girl. What the fuck? My wife wakes up and screeches loudly. It's our son. He just stood there kind of grinning, and he says something to my wife. She starts asking him questions. What is it? Are you okay? Do you need to go to the toilet? He's just grinning in between talking mumbo jumbo, dream gibberish. We realize his eyes are glazed over and he is still asleep, and so she takes him back to his bed. He's never done this before, and with everything else that happened that day, we were a little freaked out. We looked at each other and just went to bed without saying anything else. Finally, the last part of all of this, the next day at breakfast, as we're all kind of doing our thing, getting ready before school and work, my wife says to me that it's really weird. She realized her phone, which was always on 24-hour time mode, because she is German and that's just how she had always had it, is now in 12-hour time mode. This is the same phone that went off on our hike. She says she swears she never changed it and she can't remember if it was 24-hour time when she turned it back on the day before or just now this morning. I know for a fact all of our clocks and watches that my wife touches are set on 24-hour time. She even speaks that way and will say it's 1700 instead of 5 p.m. I never knew much about Hanging Rock, but since looking into it, if you want to read more about Hanging Rock, I found this article and this short explainer video. Apparently the book and movie are just fiction and there is no truth to it, apparently. And that is the end of that long story. I've actually never heard of Hanging Rock before, but people in the comments seem is the sun sleepwalking. Scary. Okay, guys. This next story is called Am I Going Crazy? Can someone explain? Okay, so my 22-year-old male dog. Oh, wait. So my dog Maggie has been running to my neighbor's yard frequently. My neighbor, Bob, we'll call him, died last year. Bob and I never got along well. Well, Bob didn't like me, at least. He would call the police on me for having a bonfire. Or one time, I was doing yard work with my shirt off, and he called 911 saying I was naked in my yard. Another time, I was washing my boat with a hose, and he called the police claiming I was making love to my boat. What a nightmare neighbor. He was one of those old grumpy fucks, but that's beside the point. Last year, he killed himself. I'm a paramedic. I work in the city outside of where I live, but I still catch wind of these things, which is how I know. Bizarre, but honestly, it didn't faze me. My dog Maggie is trained to track deer. I'm an avid bow hunter, for those of you who don't know. Unlike rifle hunting, a deer that's been struck by an arrow can run quite a ways before bleeding out and dropping dead, hence why I have Mag's help to help me find the buck. She's been running off into Bob's yard a lot this past month. The other day she brought me a deer leg from his yard, so finally I said, fuck it, the guy's dead, I'm gonna investigate. Nothing was out of the ordinary, but once I got to the tree line in his backyard, I caught a pungent smell. I followed it about 100 yards into the woods and found 3 deer carcasses laying together. It's not super uncommon to find those where I live, but still sort of rare. Coyotes track them down, and well, nature, but 3 laying all together like that. Some people have proposed the idea that maybe the coyotes have been dragging them to the same spot, which is possible. But my thing is, why would a pack of coyotes not just eat it where they killed it? It gets weirder. Once again, Maggie ran off on me. That's the downside to having a trained pup. Once they catch a scent, it's hard to pull them off. She started barking furiously. I ran over to get her with my flashlight. She was barking the way she had been taught to when she found something. I swept the ground, but didn't see anything until I looked up and damn near jumped out of my skin. In the living room window, there was a buck staring directly at me inside the house. Now I'm absolutely stumped. There is not an open door, not a hole in the foundation. There's nothing this deer could have gotten through. I checked in broad daylight the next morning too. No broken windows, nothing. I myself had to use a pry tool to open the door. I was a fireman before I switched to EMS full time. I promise I don't rob houses, LOL. When I searched the house for it, it was gone. Once again, no sign of a way for it to get out. I work 24-hour shifts, so it occurred to me that maybe I'm just overtired. But Max is the best hunting dog I've ever had. She doesn't make mistakes. She was barking at that window. I made eye contact with this thing. Never been a believer in the paranormal, but something is awfully sketchy about these woods ever since he's passed. I have a couple of maple trees just before my property line in my backyard that I tap, and I've been seeing all sorts of animal bones and remains as well. Is there anybody who knows a little more about this shit than I do that can tell me I'm not fucking insane? And that's the end of that story. Somebody suggested setting up a trail cam, and I totally agree. Set up a camera. See if you find anything. Maybe there is a cult killing deer in your dead neighbor's house. That's amazing. Okay. Very creepy. Definitely set up that camera. I would, if they update, I will read the update later. population tripled. It was cottage country, so people would spend all summer enjoying the lake and warm nights around campfires with family and friends. I spent every summer there growing up, and it still brings fond memories of sunshine and laughter and the sound of motorboats on the lake. But the winters were different. The people that didn't live there all year would venture back home to the city life, leaving the area mostly deserted, with cottages boarded up for the winter. There were a few people that still frequently would come up every couple of months for a few days or so, but for the most part, the lake was silent during the winter, and the town was just filled with locals. The beautiful pine trees are always covered with snow, making the forest quiet. Our cottage was on a dead-end road. There were about 20 other cottages on the road, with ours being somewhat in the middle. The cottages were quite spaced out, however, with our closest neighbors being too far away to see through the trees. My dad had needed to head up to the cottage to do some painting that my mom had been bugging him to do. It was at the end of February, and it was a long weekend, so I tagged along so he wouldn't be alone and we could spend some quality time together. How sweet. It was about a 5-hour drive from our home, but turned out to be an 8-hour drive due to the heavy snow. It had gotten dark out quite early, and it was around midnight as we drove through Algonquin Park. It was deadly quiet and pitch black, except for the headlights of the car. We finally passed through the park, with only about 30 minutes left to get to the cottage. It had stopped snowing, and we were both eager to get there. As we turned onto the familiar road, I remember my dad cursing. It hadn't been plowed yet. This wasn't surprising, however. It probably wouldn't be until later the next day that we would even see a snowplow. As we drove down the road, I noticed there was a fresh set of tire tracks. The Smiths must be up for the weekend, my dad had said. All of a sudden, as we drove around the bend, following the tire tracks, the headlights of the car shone on a white van that was parked on the side of the road. It was almost hidden by the vast trees that were covered with snow. What the? My dad mumbled. As we drove past the white van, I remember looking back through the back window and very clearly seeing 2 figures in the front seat illuminated by retreating taillights. I told my dad this and he shrugged. Maybe they're lost. I nodded but couldn't help but think about how it was a dead-end road and why they would feel the need to park there. As we pulled into our driveway and we started bringing our stuff in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't stop thinking about that van and why it was there, with the 2 people just sitting in the dark in the middle of the night. It spooked me so much that I begged my dad to let me sleep upstairs with him instead of sleeping downstairs in the room my sister and I usually shared. It had big windows with no blinds that looked out into the blackness of the forest, and my 15-year-old self was already scared of the dark, even without seeing the white van. It wasn't a big deal when my sister was there, but not tonight. As my dad got ready for bed, I sat in the living room reading a book. My dad had turned all the lights off, and I was just using a small lamp next to the couch and trying to get through one last chapter before bed. It was so quiet, I could almost hear my ears ringing. I also started to get the feeling that I was being watched. The living room had large windows, also with no curtains, that overlooked the lake, and it was black except for a light or 2 from cottages across the lake. I shut off the lamp and got up. Now that the cottage was dark, the moon was shining brightly, illuminating the snow. It was beautiful, and I walked towards the window to get a better look. Movement caught my eye, and I remember my heart dropping as I saw 2 figures down by the back porch, below the window, barely hidden by the surrounding trees. I dropped to the floor and crawled towards the bedroom where my dad was sleeping. My heart was in my throat. time he got to the window, the two figures were gone. Where I had seen the figures, two sets of footprints in the snow led back around to the front of the cottage and back down the driveway. I begged my dad not to go outside. He double-checked the locks and turned on the porch lights, hopefully to scare anyone off. My dad wasn't as freaked out as I was, but still set the alarm. Before he headed back to bed, I remember being freaked out, and I laid there all night next to my dad, terrified I'd look out the window and see them staring back at me. The next morning, my dad went outside and confirmed that there were two sets of footprints leading from the road to behind our cottage, and then back around to the front of the cottage and back up to the road. There were tire marks that showed that the vehicle had turned around and gone back up the main road. My dad guessed that they were probably looking to break in and steal stuff, as it was the middle of winter and not too many people were up at the lake. But they knew we were there. They would have seen our tire tracks leading to our cottage and my dad's car parked out front. They also may have seen the lamp I had turned on to read and or seen it go off. My dad didn't have an answer to that, and after much back and forth, he called non-emergency lines and reported it. Apparently, there had been some break-ins in the area, and some stuff had been stolen from some cottages that were boarded up for the winter. But again, I still wonder to this day, why would they be interested in stealing from a house that clearly has people inside of it? Good point, good point. If the doors hadn't been locked, would they have entered? I wonder. Very, very well written, I do have to say. It felt like I was reading a story out of a book. Very well written. I loved it. Very creepy. And, yeah, a creepy situation to be in. This last story is a little bit of a lengthy one as well, but it is a good one. And it is titled, I Used to Work on the North Slope of Alaska. Here's one of my stories. I used to work on the North Slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaska Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test rock formations for their oil-producing qualities. It was mid-January. The sun hadn't quite come up yet. And when I say the sun hadn't come up yet, I mean in almost a month and a half. Polar nights are intense. The particular well site we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska, deep in the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we finished, and we were headed back to the camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and end of the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to check in and out of for safety. There's no cell phone reception. Radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out in a set time, they come looking for you to ensure you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 in the morning, not that it mattered in the land of endless night, and we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow, as the speed limit on the road is only 25 miles per hour. When something appeared on the road in our headlights, it was a man in jeans and sneakers and a hoodie jacket walking down an ice road in wilderness tundra at 4 a.m. and it was 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for the local Inuit people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the guard shack. Seemed plausible. He didn't acknowledge us as our trucks rolled up next to him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't seem cold. His clothing, while totally not appropriate for this extreme weather, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed he wasn't Inuit, but suggested that maybe he was in an accident and in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell coming off of him. He smelled acidic, if that makes sense. There was just a lot about this guy that made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had had enough of all of this. He rolled down his window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said he was just going to try and shake him out of his stupor. Before my buddy's hand could reach him, though, this walking popsicle spun around and latched onto my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra. My buddy groaned in pain as he tried to get his arm free from Mr. Popsicle. At that moment, this guy started screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle dude still had a hold of my buddy's arm, and he was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held onto my buddy to keep him inside. After several moments, it could have only been a few seconds, my buddy tore free from this guy, and we hauled ass to the guard shack another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported that what we had just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank, but policy said they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruises in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guard, and we were told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the next day. The next time we saw the guard at his shack, we asked him if he ever saw Mr. Popsicle on his patrols. He told us they searched up and down that ice road for a solid 12-hour shift and saw nothing, not even tracks, in the snow leading off the road. He told us it was a good prank and that he'd get us back for making him waste a shift driving around. But it wasn't a prank. Who would make up a story like that? And who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer to what happened that evening. I still wonder about that dude, even if he even was a dude. The Alaska tundra is a weird place, and that was just one of my many weird stories from my time up there. I'll work to write down more of my experiences and share them to the appropriate subs. Crazy. I think that one is my favorite story of the 6. I've heard that Alaska is full of really weird people. That's what I've heard. I've heard, like, if you vacation to Alaska and you go into, like, the smaller towns, people are strange, which I kind of want to experience it, but I'm also scared. Have you ever been to Alaska, and can you vouch that people there are odd? Anyway, that is the end of that very well written crazy story. That's just crazy. I mean, we can say it's a ghost, we can say it's just a man on drugs, we could say it was a hallucination, who knows? We could say the story is fictional, who knows? But it was a good story nonetheless. Okay guys, if you made it this far, then wow, I'm glad you like these stories too. I will be back making more creepy stories in the future, but today I did want to give a shout out. A very, very excited shout out to my first patron. Ernesto, thank you so much for becoming a patron. I just posted my Patreon a couple videos ago, a celebration for hitting 1,000 subs, and maybe patron.